Hey, what's up guys? I'm Ryan from ExtremeTerrain, and today I'm here with the Rough Country 2-inch suspension lift kit with shocks fitting your 1997 to 2006 Wrangler TJ. This is going to be for the TJ owner that's on a budget and looking for an affordable option to gain them some additional ground clearance. This is a great option over coil spring options as it's going to maintain that factory ride quality and it's also more cost efficient. This kit is going to lift and level your Jeep, getting rid of that factory rake and allow you to fit up to a 31-inch tire. This kit comes with coil spring spacers, allowing you to reuse those stock coils and aftermarket shocks that are going to handle all that tough terrain. This lift kit is a little easier to install than your standard lift kit, and there's no modification required. Now, this is a very affordable option and reasonably priced on the site considering what you're getting. At just over $200, I think this is a great kit to go with as it's going to get you some additional ground clearance and it's going to get you out on those trails. Now, as far as install goes, I am going to give this a strong 2 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter. Expect this to take about a half day and you can use basic hand tools to install this. Now, with that being said, let's hop into the install. Tools required for this install: 1/2-inch drive impact, 3/8 drive impact, socket extensions, a pry bar, 3/8 drive ratchet, 1/4-inch drive ratchet, T55 Torx, a standard and metric socket set, standard and metric wrench set, screwdriver, flathead, vice grips, adjustable wrench, rust-busting lubricant, a dead blow hammer, a ratchet strap if you choose to go that route, safety glasses, safety gloves, and a Sawzall if you choose to go that route. So to begin this installation, the first thing we're going to do is put this Jeep up on our lift. That way we can remove the wheels and tires, and then we'll be able to access the suspension underneath. So next what we're going to do is take a 19mm socket to remove our factory lug nuts. Now if you don't have these little chrome caps on your lug nuts, you're going to need to use an 18mm socket. So before you attempt to install this lift on a TJ, since these are older vehicles, I would recommend going around and squirting all of the nuts and bolts with just some lubricant, any kind of thing that's going to break up that rust. However, we've already done that, so we got our Jeep up in the air. First thing we're going to do is support our axle with pole jacks. So the first thing we're going to do is disconnect our track bar. We're going to disconnect it by removing the bolt where it meets the axle. This is going to allow the axle to drop down far enough that we can get those coil springs out. I'm going to use a 15mm socket on this, but your TJ may have a giant Torx bit. So the next thing we're going to do is disconnect our sway bar links. We're going to disconnect them where they meet the axle. We're going to use a T55 Torx and an 18mm wrench. And we're going to save all this hardware since we're going to put this all back together. So the next step, we're going to start removing these front shocks. We're going to start with the bottom bolts. You're going to have 2 bolts. We're going to use a 1/2-inch socket and wrench to take those out. So after you get the bottom of the shock unbolted, the next thing we're going to do is unbolt the top so we can completely remove it. We're going to use a 15mm wrench. So if you're trying to get the nut off of the top of this shock and it gets stuck, you can grab the top of it with some vice grips. If the vice grips do not hold enough to get that nut off, then you can resort to a Sawzall. We're going to Sawzall the tops off of these because we're not going to reuse these shocks at any point in time. If you do want to reuse these shocks, I would recommend just trying to get that nut off. If you are using a Sawzall, I'd recommend wearing safety glasses and protective gloves. So once we get that a little loose, we're going to lower our axle down some. That way we can free up this shock. There we go. And we're going to do the same thing for the other side. Starting with those bottom bolts. If your TJ is equipped with ABS, you may need to use a 10mm socket to back this bolt out so you can get to that back nut. So we finally got the front disassembled, which actually wasn't too bad, even though we did have to cut those front shocks out. However, before we get the rest of this kit installed and we start with the reassembly of the front, I want to tell you a little bit about what this new kit consists of. Now, this new kit comes with coil spring spacers. The nice thing about coil spring spacers is that they reduce the cost. You're not going to pay extra money for new coil springs, and you can reuse those factory ones, giving you that factory ride quality. You're going to maintain that. These are made of heavy-duty steel plating, so they're plenty strong, and they have a black powder coating, which is going to provide some corrosion resistance. Now, of course, we're adding distance to the axle. We're pushing it away from the vehicle, so we're going to need longer shocks. This kit comes with new shocks, and these shocks are Rough Country's N2.0 shocks. They are a nitrogen-filled shock, so they're not going to cause cavitation like a hydraulic shock would on very rough terrain. They're going to ride a little rough on the street, but they're going to perform very well off-road. These shocks have a large 1 3/8 internal bore, and they have a hardened chrome-plated piston rod. This piston rod is going to resist any scratching or scoring, and it's going to protect that seal inside of there, so you're not going to have any leakage problems, especially because they don't have a cover that comes with them. Now, these shocks are finished out with a silver powder coating, and this once again is just going to protect the body of the shock, and it's going to protect it from all of those corrosion causing elements and protecting those, keeping them from rusting. Pretty basic kit and is really great for the money, especially if you have a stock Wrangler and you're just looking for a little more ground clearance. So with all of that being said, we're going to show you how to get this installed and what it looks like on the Jeep. So with that being said, let's start on the reassembly, show you how to get it installed and what it looks like on the Jeep. So at this point in time, we're going to lower our axle down so we can unload these springs and get them out of the Jeep. While you're doing this, you want to make sure that you are not pulling on any lines. So if you see any lines that are binding up, you want to free those lines up so that we can drop it the rest of the way down. If you have an untouched TJ, most likely on the back of your coil spring, you're going to have a coil spring retainer. You can use a 1/2-inch socket and just pull that bolt out, and that'll free up that coil spring. So next we're going to remove this rubber bump stop. That way we can take the bolt out of this cup. Once we take the cup off, we're going to take this stock isolator on, and then we'll slide the new spacer on and put everything back together. So you just want to wiggle this thing back and forth until it comes out. So next we're going to use a 15mm socket to remove the bolt out of the inside of this cup. So next we're going to get this isolator off. So it's really stuck on there. You can get a screwdriver in there and pry down on this thing. And that way we can slide it all the way off. Then we're going to take our new spacer. Now you're going to have a large hole and you're going to have a smaller hole. The smaller hole is going to face down. So we're going to slide that up and over. Then we're going to put our isolator back on with this ridge facing down. And then we're going to reinstall the bump stop cup. It'd be a good idea to put anti-seize on these threads, just in case you ever want to take this thing apart again. So after that, once you get that cup back in and tightened up, we're going to put this bump stop back in. Now it's a good idea to apply grease or any kind of lubricant on here. It'll make it slide up in there a little better. And we're just going to wiggle that back into place. So now that all that is reassembled, the next thing we're going to do is install our coil spring. Now on the bottom of your axle, you're going to have a stop for this little pigtail here. You're going to make sure that that sits in there properly. Then we'll do the same thing for the other side. So if you can't get the axle to drop far enough to get the spring in, what you can do is disconnect the drag link from your pitman arm, and that should allow it to drop a little bit more to get these springs in. So at this point in time, we're ready to install our front shocks. So you're gonna have these cup washers. We're gonna face this one up. You're gonna place a rubber bushing. We're gonna have this little edge that's gonna face up. Once we go up through the body, this shock mount up here, this bushing is gonna face down, and then we're gonna place our cup facing down as well. After that, we're gonna install this washer they give us. And then we're gonna install the supplied nut. Then we're gonna take a 9/16 wrench and we're gonna tighten that nut up so we can compress these bushings. Then for the bottom, we're gonna reinstall that factory hardware. Then we'll use that 1/2" socket and wrench to tighten all that back up. Then we'll do the same thing for the other side. Prepping those bushings. Getting it up through the shock mount. Getting the bottom in there. Facing this bushing down. And our cup washer. And our other little baby washer. And the nut. So the next step in reinstalling the front is going to be to reconnect these sway bar end links. Now since we did put a spacer in there and we have longer shocks, your axle is going to drop further than the stock suspension. So this hole may not line up. If you have it up in the air like we do, you want to compress that axle and push those springs up a little bit so you can line that hole up. If you want to drop the Jeep on the ground, it's going to compress all by itself due to the weight of the vehicle, and that hole should line up. Ideally, you want to go with new, longer aftermarket sway bar links. However, this kit doesn't come with those. So for this particular video and for this kit, we're going to reinstall these. So we have this hole lined up, so we're going to reinstall that factory hardware. And we're going to take our T55 Torx and our 18mm wrench and tighten that back up. So we have one last step as far as reassembly goes for the front. That is to reinstall this front track bar. Since we have this vehicle up in the air, these holes are not going to line up. So what we're gonna do is at the end of this whole process is we're gonna put the wheels back on and set the Jeep on the ground. That way we can use the weight of the vehicle, turn the steering wheel to shift that axle over and line that bolt up. So as of right now, we're gonna move on to the rear and start with the disassembly. So we've moved on to the rear, and the first thing we're gonna do is support our axle with pole jacks. So now that you have the axle supported with pole jacks, the next thing we're going to do is disconnect the track bar where it bolts to the frame. We're going to use a 15mm wrench and an 18mm wrench. This bolt is going to be a little hard to get out because the axle wants to shift. So you can use a pry bar just to get in there to get it out, or you can use that 15mm wrench to unscrew it all the way. So after you get the track bar disconnected, the next thing we're gonna do is disconnect our sway bar links. Now we're gonna remove this bolt right here on the bottom of the link. We're gonna use an 18mm socket and a 15mm wrench. Same thing for the other side. So next we're going to start working on disconnecting our shocks. So we're going to start down here at the bottom bolt. We're going to use that same 15mm wrench and that 18mm socket to remove these bolts. So the next thing we're going to do is remove the top of the shock. Now there's going to be 2 bolts up there. We're going to use a 1/2 inch socket. These bolts usually are pretty stuck. So what you can do is get in there with some sort of spray can with a long straw in there. And you can spray the top of those and let them sit. What I like to do is take a long extension with that 1/2 inch socket, slide it over the bolt, and then just smack the bottom of the socket with a hammer. And that's going to break up some of that rust in there and make them a little easier to get out. So we're going to take both of those out and then pull the shock out. Then we'll do the same thing on the other side. So once we have all that stuff disconnected, the next thing we're going to do is lower this axle down. That way we can free up those springs and pull them out. Once you get the axle down low enough, pull the spring out. Once we get the spring out, we're going to remove our bump stop. So once again, you're just going to wiggle that, pull that out. And we use a 15mm socket to remove the bolt out of the bump stop cup. Then we're going to pull the isolator off. Once you have all that disassembled, the first thing we're going to reinstall is the spacer. Spacer is going to go up top. Then we're going to put our factory isolator on that, and we're actually going to screw this bump stop with a brand new bolt from Rough Country. It's going to go through the bump stop, through the spacer, and into that threaded hole up there. That's going to hold the whole assembly together, and then we'll reinstall the bump stop. So for this new bolt, we're going to use a 17mm socket to tighten that back up. Then we'll reinstall our bump stop. Once you get all of that in and the bump stop's back in, we're going to put that spring back in. So at this point in time, you may need to pull down on that axle just to get a little extra room. And then once we get that seated, we'll go ahead and let that bounce back up. And we'll put our pole jack back under and start on the other side. Do the same thing for the other side. So after you get both of those springs in, we're going to raise the axle back up, making sure that the springs seat properly, and then we'll get ready to reinstall the new shocks. So now that we have the springs back in, the next thing we're going to do is install the shocks. And we're going to reuse all that factory hardware, and we're actually going to start with the upper ones. I like to stage one of the bolts, the one closest to the inside of the frame rail, because it's a little tough to get to. So we'll get that one bolt in, and we'll hook the one side on and get the other bolt in. So once you get both of those bolts in, we're going to use that 1/2 inch socket and then tighten those up. And we'll do the same thing on the other side, starting with those top bolts. So next we're going to install the bottom of the shock reusing that factory hardware. So you may need to spread these brackets apart a little bit, and you may need to use a soft hammer just to tap this in place and get that bolt to go through the other side. Once you get that in, you're gonna take a 15mm wrench and an 18mm socket and tighten it up. And we'll do the same thing for the other side. So next step, we're gonna reconnect those sway bar links, reinstalling that factory bolt that we removed. Once we get that bolt in, we're gonna use an 18mm socket and a 15mm wrench to tighten it up. So the last thing to do for this Jeep is to get the front and rear track bars installed. Now there's two ways you can do this. You can use a ratchet strap to shift that axle over closer to the frame to line those holes up, or you can put your wheels and tires on, set it on the ground, and use the weight of the vehicle to hopefully line those bolts up. For this rear one, I'm gonna use a ratchet strap and show you how to shift that over so we can get that bolt in. And for the front one, I'm gonna show you how to put the Jeep on the ground and use the steering to shift that axle over so we can get those bolts installed. So if you decide to use a ratchet strap and you have a relatively strong one to use, you're gonna hook into one of these holes in the frame. You have a bottom one here that you can use and you have a top one. So we're gonna hook that into that side, and then I'm gonna grab onto the shock mount on the other end of the axle. Now once I tighten the ratchet strap over, it should shift it over enough that we can line those holes up and get that track bar back in. So once you get that bolt all the way through, we're gonna reinstall the nut, then use a 15 and an 18 to tighten it back up. Now remember, you still have to install those track bars. Whether you want to do it in the air with ratchet straps or you want to install all 4 tires and set it on the ground using that steering to line up those holes. After you have all this installed and tightened down, you want to go get an alignment and recheck all the torque. However, that's going to wrap up my review and install. For more videos like this, check us out at ExtremeTerrain.com.